What is life? Why am I here? How is it all connected? And how am I going to navigate this beautiful but crazy journey? I'm Silvia and welcome to the Soul Sunshine podcast. Today I'm talking to Ingrid Messner. Ingrid is a mentor, coach, facilitator, author and speaker who supports organizational leaders and teams to optimize their positive impact, performance and well-being. Using a holistic and practical approach, she improves leadership effectiveness while connecting people back to nature and ancient wisdom. Ingrid is a loving wife, a mom to 2 adult boys and an avid nature lover. And I'm so excited to have her on the podcast today. Welcome to the Soul Sunshine podcast, Ingrid.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for having me. We are actually here in your beautiful home in Manly today recording this episode. So yeah, thanks for having me in your space and very excited to dive deep with you today.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Awesome. So Ingrid, today we're going to be talking about how we can all be naturally successful and how we can achieve more positive impact with maybe a little bit less stress, struggle and burnout. We're talking about how we can manage our own energy in a very busy and demanding environment. How can we inspire others naturally and how can we be the best possible leaders and I guess generally people who can channel the world's natural energy flow for better results in our life, both professionally as well as personally.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot.
It does sound like a lot, doesn't it? We'll see how we go. Ingrid, when I was reflecting back on how we met or when we met, it was quite a few years ago when we were both working out of Hub Sydney, which is a co-working space in the city. And I remember you were doing the nature retreats back in the day with David Boynton, who I've also had on this podcast in episode 3. Yeah, that's where our paths crossed for the first time.
Yes, that's a long time ago.
I know, it feels like that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to dive into it with you today and see what's been happening. You've recently launched a book called Naturally Successful, which I'm very excited to talk to you about. So yeah, should we jump into the conversation?
Yes, let's get to it.
Let's get to it. So Ingrid, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your background.
The most obvious that will stand out to people is my accent. So I was born in Germany and we moved to Australia as a family when my kids were 9 and 10, and that was in 2004. We thought we would only stay for a couple of years maybe, and then here we are, still here in Sydney. And then it turned out that we discovered our love for nature even more. Plus, we did lots and lots of experiences with different indigenous people. And I found it fascinating to learn from them. And over the years, my work has evolved quite a bit from where I originally started when I was in corporate, was being a marketing director and at the same time a management center development coach, like an internal coach. And then over the years, I've morphed more and more into the leadership development space. And especially when we came to Australia, I thought this might be a more interesting area. And then the other area that interested me was everything around sustainability. And it took me a while to find a way to sort of combine all these things. The book is actually sort of one of the final, I wouldn't say pinnacle, but like one of the moments when I felt like, now all the things that I experienced and knew and have practiced, they come together in one place. Before they were all very separate.
It's really beautiful how you're describing it. I really like that because it's so often in our life that we have lots of different interests and we are looking for a way to combine things or to, bring them together. And so seeing how you have managed that over the years and how every role and all the work that you have been doing is bringing you to this point is really beautiful.
Yeah, but it was a journey with lots of ups and downs. For example, I think around 2009, I had the sense that Australia was a little bit behind in terms of thinking around sustainability. At the same time, I had all these experiences with indigenous people and thinking they have known for thousands of years how to live sustainably. Plus, their leadership is very different to what I'm experiencing in corporate or other businesses with my clients. So how can I maybe connect these two? So overall, I see myself as a connector, which means I have a broad knowledge and experience in many different areas, but not necessarily everywhere very deep. It's more the sense of what is the underlying thread.
So your book is titled Naturally Successful, and it's aimed at people to help them live a more naturally successful life. And on the back of your book it says, and I find that really interesting, it says naturally successful is for leaders who want to create positive change for people and the planet and be well at the same time. And I find that "and to be well at the same time" sentence really interesting because, you know, first of all, I would like to ask you, why is this so important for you personally, and what sparked, I guess, the need to write about this? But then also, why do we need to explicitly say "be well at the same time"? Even, you know, the fact that we need to say that's not just something that's automatically happening anymore, that we put our well-being first is a really interesting concept.
There are many different aspects to it. So maybe to keep to two. One was that I had a lot of clients that were quite exhausted by the amount of tasks they think they have to do, and a bit overwhelmed and stressed, and oh my God, I've got all these difficult stakeholders. And because the stress level was quite high, plus in sustainability or social change, it's quite often that many people have been following what's going to happen for decades, or at least many years. So a lot of the data and the predictions that we saw before are now becoming true, which is then this depressing situation where you think, I knew it. I tried my best. I tried my best to save the world, and I'm failing. Or we as a society are failing. So I have to do more to keep us safe, which is, first of all, a very, very big task that no one can really deliver on. So that puts somehow stress on people, even if it's not conscious, subconsciously, many people in this space think that. So it's a little bit like this depression and grief because you see a lot of nature is suffering and we are losing species, so biodiversity is decreasing and different landscapes are changing. So there's grief for that, and it's not that everyone is really aware of what they're feeling is actually grief or depressive thoughts because of this very big, idealistic, hopeful vision that you have. So I was seeing that in many conversations, and that has got an impact on the well-being of people. And still, even though everyone knows it, it's like you can only give what you have got, and self-care is not selfish, but it's still in us, oh, I can't take this time out because there are so many things and other people have it worse. So who am I to take care of myself? So the selfish thought came up, and then to reframe it, saying actually self-care is more like a community service, because to take care of yourself and then show up as your best self, most likely you can achieve more, plus you radiate more hope, which means other people are more inspired to actually act, because the moment it's all doom and gloom, no one really wants to do anything because it's anyway gone. So that whole area was one thing that motivated me to write the book, because I thought maybe if only a few people read the book or work with me, sort of get a shift in their mindset, and it helps them to feel better and deliver more for their stakeholders and the environment and define goals in a way that serve them and the system, then that would be a success. And then at the same time, I had two health issues that made me realize how quickly everything can go downhill and become really difficult. And they both were not life-threatening, but life-changing. So, and that inspired me as well, because during that time I learned a lot about self-care and energy management and how to deal with the challenges that arise of that. And also noticing, especially with the second one, the moment your physical body, which never is just a physical body, it's also your mental health space, it's really very strongly connected. The moment your physical body goes and you can't do work anymore, then you're of no help to anyone. So in my case, it was a viral infection that literally robbed me of all the energy. So I couldn't work for several months and I couldn't walk in the very beginning. So relearning that was quite a change. And I thought, okay, I've learned now so much of that. And I like to share it because I don't wish it on anyone to go through something similar. And mine wasn't even life-threatening. However, what I also learned, one of the biggest things is the empathy and self-compassion, where I'm saying pain is not a competition. Like, my reality is a real one. And yes, there are people who have it worse, but that doesn't help me in the moment to be better. And that was a learning and insight. I thought that would be really good if I can share that. And it's not that things that I discovered are necessarily new, but I never ever found someone supporting me to see the holistic way of healing. So, and that was another thing where I saw a lot of parallels in the health issue dealings, where the moment you try to make it more systemic, it becomes more complex, but you also have a better chance of actually healing. And in business, it's the same. I had this one moment when I broke my leg, and then after 3 months, I woke up in the middle of the night and wrote down all the things that had helped me to heal, and then looked at it and thought, oh my God, this is the same as what I'm working in business with people. So I sat down and wrote the same thing up for business. And then I thought, wow, that's interesting. It's quite similar, the thinking behind it. And there's a leadership lesson in it. And that partly went into the book, but not to the level of detail that I experienced it.
And what's that lesson?
The lesson of everything for me was actually, you have to really think about, and first of all, be able to notice what is happening in you and then in other people and the environment, and bring it together sort of in a structured way. There's some people out there who are really good in sort of sensing their way through something like this. It's more like a labyrinth. But others benefit from having a little bit like a structure where I can say, okay, in my physical health, this is happening. Emotionally, I'm well. Mentally, spiritually. Then my relationships, all the social, and then the environment in different ways. So my home environment, my work environment, the natural environment where we're in, maybe the country. So all these elements impact you and play a role, and the sum of all of it determines your level of well-being. And obviously it's never a static thing. It's one day good and the next day not so good. And the acceptance of saying, I tried my best and I thought this is the thing, but actually maybe not today. I'll try again tomorrow. So learning to accept and be patient and persistent and accepting failure. These were the lessons. I'm not actually sure whether I can give it a label, but the systemic, holistic view on this is one thing, how I also structure my work with people, because quite often we forget about it. And I'm always surprised how little people notice.
You've touched on so many things just then. There was a lot in there, and I'll go back to some of those other things. But the thing that just came out at the end, it's like that real interconnectedness of everything that we do in life and of everything that we are in life, you know, and how that's affecting each other as well, you know, and that we can't just see ourselves as one linear being. It's just so much more than that. And having that holistic view over everything and being like, maybe I'm not working as well today in my job because I've had a fight with my husband last night, or because my mom is sick and I'm worried about her, and starting to understand how things are connected. But that, like you said, and I think that's the very important thing as well, how things are always constantly shifting, and that they're not static, that they're always changing, is really important. And also the fact that you can help change the things as well. Like you can actively do things in order to make certain areas better. Like some things are out of our control, yes, but other things we have a pretty good handle on being able to shift it into the right direction. But I guess talking from a personal point of view as well, a lot of the time it's harder though. It's like when you're in a really good headspace, it's really easy to talk about it and be like, oh yeah, if I'm not feeling that well, I just go for a run and I know that I'll feel better afterwards. But then when you're in that state of, not feeling very well, it might be very hard to get up and go for that run that, makes you feel better. So what would be some of the things that you would suggest, I guess, to people to do, when they feel themselves in one of those kind of scenarios?
I listened to a very interesting presentation by the manager of the All Blacks, Inoki, forgotten his first name. The best thing I've taken away from the talk is he said there's a triangle that determines your success. So one is mindset, one is structures, and one is capabilities or skills. So, and usually people would say, oh, it all depends on mindset, given that skills are there. However, quite often it is about the structure. That was his point, that structures help you to shift your mindset when you're not in a good space. And same with James Clear in his book Atomic Habits. So the habits and routines, or the little practices that everyone has that could get you out of that space where, for example, if you're not feeling well, to have a habit ideally or a reminder somewhere to say, okay, in these moments, for example, I call a friend and talk with a friend about it, or I go and do a 5-minute meditation on an app, or it might be to just very consciously prepare a cup of tea and drink it, because that in itself takes you back to the moment. And then the moment you become aware, then you can get much more in control. So you get off this autopilot. So being aware, okay, what's happening with me? What might I need right now? Is it feasible? Because in your case, and what I remember, when the kids are smaller, you might not always have the opportunity to just get away from it. So, but there might be things where, for example, I remember with my kids, I was reading a story to them and they calmed down. So that gave me a little bit of headspace. Or to go out in nature for 10 minutes and just look at a tree or listen to some sound. So it's very different for each person. And so there is not the one solution for everyone. So in a way, the challenge for everyone is to find the few things that work for you, and don't have to be many things. What we are overlooking quite often is the simple stuff. So we make it very complex and label it as something very challenging, whereas sometimes it would be enough to take 3 breaths and ask yourself one question. And that could be, for example, what's really important right now?
I really like how you said that, because it is one of those things where we think it needs to be something extraordinary. I need to go for like a 2-hour walk or go and do a yoga session or do whatever. But yeah, even just the simple act of enjoying a warm cup of tea, maybe reading a book, doing a few breathing exercises, when you have kids, sitting down with your kids and doing something that they enjoy. I think it's just finding those small little things that will support you.
And if you feel like you would not remember, you could just write it down. Or for a while, I had it as a reminder in my phone that was popping up randomly with things that I wanted to remember. And that was helpful.
And do you think that people forget about it more easier the busier they are? You know, the more they have on and the more they have to do and the more the to-do list piles up, the more those things that are actually the things that help you and support you through the day, they are the ones that are falling away first.
Yes, I think so. Because it feels for some people then, that's another thing I have to put on my to-do list. But I heard a really good idea the other day where someone said, I have an extra to-be list where he had for a week 5 things on there how to be. And so every morning he choose one thing from the to-be list before he even started a meeting or went somewhere. And then that was like intention how to be throughout the day. And that shifted a lot. And he said then it became also easier to fulfill the to-do list because he already had the to-be list. And that's another thing, this simple saying where be, do, and have, be really aware of that, because quite often we talk about the having, like what is the result or the goal or the vision. We might think about the action plan, how to get us there, but then we forget about how do we want to be or have to show up to actually be able to do this to get that.
And the other thing that I think is also important in that context is how do you actually want to feel when you have done it? Because I think a lot of people, they just do and keep doing. And then they reach whatever they have been working towards. And they're like, but I don't really feel that great now. Why do I not feel that great now? You know, I've been working towards that. And I think that's, when you look into mindfulness, it's one of those big things. How do you want to feel like? What is this going to enable you to do? And how do you want to be at the end of this, you know?
Yeah. That's why in the book, I hadn't planned in the beginning, but in the book I have a whole chapter called Impact, which is basically around how you define success. And the biggest thing for me was this insight that success is more a feeling than a destination. So we talk about the destination in terms of KPIs in corporate or any result you want to produce, which is all necessary. However, the success feeling to get there is a lot more important. And that requires a certain awareness of what is it actually you're striving for? Is that a goal or a success measurement that someone else gave you? Or is it something that you define? So, for example, coming back to the beginning with the sustainability people and the stress level, if your goal is to change the world or create a community of 1 million people who all do whatever, that's quite big. So for many people that can be inspiring, but there's an equal amount of people where this is very frustrating along the way because it's too big, and they would benefit, especially during COVID when everything is changing, to move the goalpost a bit closer and also make it smaller so that you achieve it earlier. And then it gives you this feeling of I'm successful because I've achieved something that I choose to want. And this is not always possible.
It's that small milestones as well,
the
right?
smaller milestone. In business, it might not be realistic all the time, but there might be enough situations where you can actually choose. And if you have a big goal, to think about, okay, what are the small things in between I can celebrate, at least internally for yourself, I've achieved something so that I really feel good and proud about that. So next step.
But the other interesting thing that comes up there for me is that a lot of the time people don't even realize what they are actually achieving, and that everything that they do and everything that they work on and everything that they are is actually bringing them closer to who they want to be as a person. You know, like on your example at the beginning of the podcast, when we were talking about all those things you've been working on and doing, and you know, who you've been as a person over the years, that has all led you to writing this book. You know, you've got so much life experience, work experience, everything. It's like people are interested and people like also seeing themselves in that same context and hearing that and how other people have dealt with challenges and things that have come up for them.
Yeah, and that was a learning for me, because in the beginning I was very hesitant to share, because I thought, who's really interested in my story? And then I thought, actually, it's not about me. It's about the story and the learning and the insights. And so get over myself and just write about it. And then there will be some people where it's useful.
Yeah, and it's about your experience and what people can learn from them. It's like the same way you read other people's books and other people's articles and blogs and whatever it is. You always take something out of that, and even if it's just one thing that will help you again on your journey moving forward.
Yeah, and there are many inspiring people out there. So
yeah.
Plenty.
So I would like to go back to what you've talked about before. So I've been working in the purpose-driven space for about 9 years now, and people really feel like they have the weight of the world on their shoulders, and they just need to change it all by themselves, and they see the need to change. And if they don't do it, who else is going to do it? And it needs to change now. We don't have that much time. But because of that, I also see so many people burning out, having severe stress, having severe fatigue, and just being really sometimes at the end of it, And we've talked a little bit about that before, but I would like to dive a little bit deeper into that, because I really like what you said before, and I always say exactly the same thing, which is if you are not well, you're not going to be any help to anybody, And I kind of try to communicate that within my team at work as well, being like, well, just stay at home and rest for a day if you're not feeling well, because you're not going to be of any help if you're gone for a few weeks. Yeah. So why do you think, especially in the purpose-driven space, there is so much pressure on people, and how can people really try and find that balance for themselves? You talk a lot about self-awareness in your book as well. So how do you think people can find that self-awareness and actually, have those aha moments themselves where they're going like, oh, I'm actually not looking after myself, I need to do something.
I think in many cases it is this. We all, as human beings, want to have a sense of contribution. So we want to do something good. And then there's this whole group of purpose-driven people, social change or social economy or sustainability or whatever you call it. But generally, they want to improve either a social situation or an environmental situation for other people or animals. So it's very much external. So it's very much, one time it's more internal, but the other time it's more external. So motivations can come from different areas, but very often it is that you're externalizing the problem. So you see the problem there and you want to work with it, and not necessarily connecting it back where it actually originated. I met a woman who was campaigning against deforestation in a not-for-profit, and she was very passionate about it, and she was doing a lot of work on the computer for campaigning. So much work on the computer that eventually she burned out because she never ever got away from the computer. So she didn't get out into the forest that she was actually saying.
That she was actually so passionate about.
So she lost totally the connection to nature. She burned out and realized in this situation of burnout, I never had a balance. I could have also restored myself by being in this very thing that I want to save. Instead, she was on the computer tirelessly working to improve the situation with forests. Quite often with people in this space, they become over-passionate for an external thing and they forget totally about themselves. And this is when burnout happens. Because I noticed sometimes I had a few clients where when I meet them for a few first-time sessions, I noticed that they're not very connected to their body. So the way how they come in is, it all feels very disconnected. They're very much in their head. They have no awareness around how they move, where they are, where their feet are, where they're standing, what's happening around them. They're just thinking.
How do you establish that when you see somebody for the first time? How do you see that they are not connected to your body, to their body?
It's the way how they move and what they notice like what they would share with me, or when you ask them what else are they doing in their life and what is their stress level and how they describe it. It's more the way how they describe it. And quite often it's more, that's actually interesting. In many cases, we all sense sort of how well someone is on an unconscious level. So really we notice, but many of us would not be able to express it. So for a leader, the thing is, even though you think you're okay, but you might be very run down, grumpy, low energy leader. So your team will pick up on that and respond to it. So when one of the clients that I had over the years, when they come in and I see them moving quite stiffly and they have no energy, like their shoulders are down, their face is not very animated, and you know it without being able to describe it. So over the years, because I've done quite a lot of work in this area of noticing, then you know they're low energy, they're close to burning out. And the way how they describe it is then another indicator. Mm-hmm. So you can go through all the senses, literally. You can see it, you can hear it, you can feel it, you can't smell it. Maybe you can smell it, but you can't, definitely can't taste it. But there's lots happening in the space in between people that you can pick up on. Mm. Once you have an awareness for it. That's why in the book I've put this whole awareness piece at the beginning in every level, where you have to be aware of what's happening for you, but then you also have to be aware of what's happening for other people and what's happening in all the context around you, because otherwise you would not notice, first of all, that you are low on energy or one of your colleagues is low on energy. And that doesn't mean even if you have lots of experience, you still can get it wrong, because it's an intangible thing, but it's an important one.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because it also reminds me of the fact that, you know, like you said, you're unconsciously picking up on a lot of those things, you know. Maybe you're not even thinking about it, but once you start putting your focus on that, you actually realize how much you can pick up from other people. Mm. And it's also then how somebody else's energy could influence yours or the other way around. Because if somebody comes in with a big smile and like a really happy face, you can't really not smile back at them, right?
Yeah. But there is a danger, especially with smiling. I just saw a really good graphic somewhere on LinkedIn where someone said mental health. A lot of the people are still smiling, but they're really miserable.
Well, they're not smiling with their eyes, right? It's like like a mask.
Yes.
It's like I'm okay.
Yes,
and they're not really okay.
Many people can pick it up, but not necessarily everyone, which makes it like, okay, you have to see like the whole body. And the eyes especially, smiling with the eyes. That's a good point.
Yeah, my husband always says that to me when he's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, nothing. Everything's good. He was like, you're not smiling with your eyes. What's wrong? Which I think is true. Because, I mean, the eyes are known to be the window to your soul as well, right? Yeah. And so through looking into somebody's eyes, you can really tell a lot. And I remember being in this workshop years ago. And one of the exercises that we did was just sitting down with one person and just looking into their eyes for 5 minutes. And then you were telling the other person how they feel, and the other person was telling you how you feel. It was incredible how much of the stuff that people said, like both ways, was actually really how people were feeling. But it's like that we don't take the time and the space in this day and age to really sit down and connect with people on such a deep level, you know. It's like you said, everyone's busy, everyone's got a lot of work on. You kind of say hello while you're walking around, and it's just...
And you just said something really, really important, is the time factor. So when you are rushed, your senses are not able to pick up on all the tiny, tiny data that the other person actually sends. So you have to slow down to a certain degree, and the more proficient and skillful you become at doing this, it's the same as when you're in nature. So we did a walk in Tasmania a few weeks ago, my husband and I, and there were a few people who were so fast, literally running more or less through the forest. the tar kind. And then we were quite slow and we saw a lot more. So we saw all the tiny, tiny fungi and mushrooms and all the different colors, and it was quite fascinating. And then when we stopped and I said, oh, did everyone see this blue fungi? And I said, no. So it's like, and this is the same. So if you want to pick up on something that is maybe important but small, to a certain degree, you have to slow down.
Yeah, and like your story is really beautiful as well, because that reminds me of having small kids as well. And you know how they just take forever to get somewhere.
Yes.
And some days you're like, can we just hurry this thing up? But then, yeah, they look at every rock and at every flower and this. And when you just stop as well and notice things with them, you see all those things that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. And I think you can really put that into any context in your life, you know, if it's in nature, yes, but also if it's in a work environment, you know, what are you not picking up from your colleagues or from your clients that, you know, that might be
There's a high cost attached to it that quite often we don't see. So if you're not noticing, coming back to the burnout, if you're not noticing certain signs that your body is giving you, then you might burn out.
It's also about not noticing versus not wanting to notice them.
Could be, because it could be that your body subconsciously or your mind tells you, if I go really hard now, burn out, then I get a rest. And it's socially accepted because I'm ill. That's not conscious, but for some people, definitely it's the body's way or the mind's or the universe way of protecting you from worse, where it sort of forces you to rest, to take stock or to do something differently. It's like an artificial pause button. And for some people that works, and for other people who just get better and do it again, because there are many people who have not only one burnout, but many.
Yeah. And what are the signs that people would see before a burnout? And what would be your recommendations of what to do when they do see those signs? I know it's like every person is different, obviously, and every situation is different. But what is maybe one or two simple things that people can keep in mind that when next time that happens, you know, what can I do?
Last year I did a course on neuroscience. And that was again a moment that made it clear to me, sleep is such an important thing, totally undervalued. When you don't get enough sleep, your brain, for example, can't detox and work through certain things. But the thing that it really brought home to me is the importance of having enough sleep, having good quality sleep. And then also what surprised me is that there's a lot of research, for example, for lunchtime naps. And obviously that feels like a luxury, but if, for example, someone is feeling the first effects on their body, that might be indicating the direction of burnout. So you might be feeling, okay, I'm not sleeping enough, or my sleep is very bad, or I wake up constantly. So this resting piece is not there. That might be one of the first indications, because that has a flow-on effect on your mental health and your physical health. So if you're not sleeping well, you're not recovering well enough, which means you have already a lower energy level to take on the day. So you're operating from a lower base, which most likely this is how other people can notice it. If someone constantly snaps at other people or is grumpy or feeling very down and not very enthusiastic anymore, or can't smile a lot in a real way. So these are all things that other people might notice. And the person might notice, for example, pressure on their chest or back pain. So it's something that is unusual for their body. What do you notice in your body that is different and doesn't feel like it's uplifting you and supporting you? That might be a thing. And in your mind, what are you thinking? Are you very excited about getting to work? Or does it feel more like you don't even want to get up in the morning? Or you can't decide what to wear? These tiny things could be all signs. But from everything I know and notice, it's not one thing that would tell you you're going direction burnout.
So I think it's really about, the more self-awareness you have around your own body and around your own mind, the more you can also then see the changes if they happen. And that can be a warning sign, being like, why is this happening? And how can I steer against that again?
Also, you might have an artificial break that you can create if you look at your calendar for a week and you get this sense of absolute overwhelm and no focus, and it's getting worse over time, then there might be a point in time where you think, oh, I should stop now and get some support. And that could come in a variety of ways. But because the calendar for most of us today is quite visual, and oh my God, this is full, and how many of these things during a day are energizing me, or how many of the meetings or interactions I have with people or projects are draining me. So if you then have an energy balance and say 8 out of 10 things drain me and only 2 things give me energy, and the next week you only have 1 thing that gives you energy, you can already see there is no balance. But it requires you to be self-aware and notice, because otherwise it might be still there, but you might not be able to see it.
And I think the other thing that comes to mind there as well is I can support you to a degree, but it is you that needs to make the changes. And I think that's a very important thing as well. It comes back to, first of all, self-awareness, but then also self-discipline in terms of actually making the changes and actually creating that space for yourself.
Make it important enough so that you actually want to do it. And one of the biggest things around self-awareness is that it takes you off autopilot. If you're not really aware, you're running on autopilot, driven by most likely other people or your past. So the longer things are dwelling that happened in the past, they will direct you, whether you want it or not. So that's why doing some personal development work might be good, just to clean out your closet to a certain degree.
Oh, I agree.
Not everything will be useful and necessary, but there might be some stories that you keep telling yourself that are not helping you. So to get rid of that, have the awareness, first of all, what is it? Might need a few attempts. You might not get away with it from the first moment, but if you keep trying, it will eventually, hopefully, dissolve.
Like you said, it's about cleaning out some of those old belief systems that we have pretty much built up over years and years, that might not benefit us anymore, but then also making a very conscious decision to wanting to change that, because I think, people need to want to do it themselves in order to create the change for themselves. Because you can tell somebody something like 100 times, it's not going to happen unless they really want to do it themselves.
Yes, and usually people change if either the pain is big enough or you get something to strive for that is big enough. Most likely it's the pain.
Yes.
The pain level has to rise to a certain level. That's why usually before I start working with people, I do like an interview where I ask them, how high is your level of frustration with this out of 10? And if someone says 4, then I said, okay, we don't really have to start to work together because I can't make a difference in your life. If it's not a 7, 8, 9 or 10, but it's not maybe the issue you really want to work on. Maybe there's a different topic. But the one that you're telling me with a 4, I'm questioning, why are we actually talking? So there must be something else that bothers you or you want to improve on.
But it's interesting because the person might classify that as a 4, but then not realize that something else is actually influencing that, which is interconnectedness of things. But people sometimes don't realize that they actually have something to do with each other.
Yes, yeah. And quite often it then happens that they come up with something totally different.
Exactly. Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? So we were talking about self-awareness and how we can see when we need to make changes personally. But then there's also that other aspect of connecting more deeply with other people. And in your book, you're writing it really nicely. You describe them as difficult people, but in the same time, you're saying if you describe someone as a difficult person, it actually says more about your mindset than it does about the person itself. Yeah. So how can we work with people that we feel challenged by? Yeah. And how can we support them as well to come along on that journey with us?
So I think sometimes it's good to get to another level where you think, okay, let me think about what's really driving this person and then what's really important for them. So get away from what you are feeling and thinking about the other person. And that takes you away from feeling they're difficult, because no one really wants to be difficult. Very, very few exceptions where someone intentionally is difficult, but they do it on purpose. But it's rare, I would say. It's more that they are in a space where they do the best they can at that moment in time with whatever resource they have available. And resources could be their skill or the role or the money or whatever they need at that time. Doesn't mean that you would see the same person a few weeks later. That person might be totally different. So that's why in indigenous cultures quite often they say we wait for the right person at the right moment in time at the right place. For things really to happen, in a way, certain things have to come together. And when in business you have these conversations, you feel like quite often you don't have the luxury of waiting for the right moment in time. So then that's okay, but then you have to work around it. It doesn't really help to think, okay, I'm going to have this conversation with this difficult stakeholder, because already in your mind you think the problem is with them, because you're putting a label on them, which might not be the most effective way of thinking of it. Is that, okay, I know this person most likely might not want to support my project. Why is that? Do I know everything, the reasons for this? If not, then it might be good to have a conversation around what makes you resist. It's around exploring what is their motivation, or what is their skill set, or what is their environment.
It also brings me to that human interconnectedness that's really important when you're working with people. You know, we looked at how important is it to know yourself really well, but then how important is it also to know others really well? You know, your team members, your clients, your stakeholders. How important is that interpersonal connection? And in your book, you're talking about that ancient wisdom, you know, from indigenous leaders as well. And I really love that story. And I actually just a few weeks ago had a conversation with an indigenous man about exactly the same thing. It's like when you meet somebody in our Western culture, you say, what's your name? And then what do you do for work, you know? But in the indigenous culture, it's way more about who are you as a person and how are you, you know? And then you take it a step further in your book as well. And you're talking about, you know, what does the land look like where you're coming from? What's the family that you grew up in? You know, it's like all those questions. It's a way more personalized approach of getting to know people and getting to know the other person's story as well. And how that then can support and help a working relationship as well.
Yeah, so what I've experienced is quite often the relationship building is a lot more important than working on the task. The task is important, but the first is like really building the relationship. And then the relationship is not standalone between just the two people. It is also around the whole community behind it. Where do they come from in terms of community, of land? And how is that impacting who they are in this moment in time? That's why the acknowledgement of country is important, but even more when there is an indigenous person does the welcome to country. If it's really well done, they would say, okay, this is the land from here to there, and this is what's happening there, and this is the people, and that's how we do it. And all these things, I can't repeat it because it's not my thing, but you get a much better sense of what's has been traditionally happening in this area. And then it's different whether you're like saltwater people or mountain people or desert people, because that comes with its own challenges or learnings and wisdom. And so very different, and the energy is different.
There seems to be quite a big importance behind that. Why do you think that has been lost in our Western society over the years? Because you would think that back in the day it was a little bit more like that probably as well. When we're looking at our grandparents or great-grandparents, that sense of community, that sense of country belonging was very strong.
I think that we are both good examples of that, because we have moved. And we have moved out of our sort of natural environment, out of the community, out of the family, and then over the whole industrial age. It is that people have moved around, and in corporate, decisions are taken somewhere in a headquarter by someone who has actually not been in that area where they might take the decision for. So they have no idea about the context of the land and the communities and all of that. So, and with the more digital age, it's even more abstract, because it's not the real thing. So you have the map, but it's not the territory. And so you can look at Google Maps and Google Earth and all of that, but it's different when you're there. So there is a disconnect somewhere. And then the more you live in these digital worlds, the more difficult it becomes to go back to really feel the land.
How do you think we can regain some of that again?
So for me, I think it's somewhere in between, where you find the balance that works for you at that point in time, where there is a bit of digital experience and then there is natural, more earth, nature experience. Nature experience here in Australia would be different than nature experience in Europe. Or nature experience in the snowy mountains is different than when you're in Arnhem Land or in the center. So it's very different. So it's dependent on where you are and how you feel in that environment.
So we were talking about how, in indigenous cultures, it's so much more important to get to know the person. And you're saying in your book as well that you've worked a lot with indigenous cultures all over the world, really, for the last couple of years. And I would just be interested, what have you learned from these personal experiences over the years? And what are you able to share with us?
So in 2000, when we were on a long holiday in Australia, we did a tour in Kakadu National Park. And that was the first time when we did this tour with the Aboriginal ranger who explained the landscape and the tree to us. And that was the first time when I looked at the tree and thought, with all his stories and explanation, the tree is a lot more than just this one tree. There's a lot more like community, the different uses and all these things. So it's very, very rich. So that started off me wanting to learn more. And then another trip, I had to learn that the learning in indigenous cultures traditionally happened more by observing. So asking a question is quite often not the best way to do it. It's in many cultures not really, I would not say not allowed, but indigenous kids would not ask the question. They would just be there. It's like look, listen and learn. So you really observe what someone in the community does. Then you listen to what they tell you, and that might only be whatever you are capable of digesting at that moment in time. So all the storytelling has got so many different layers, and usually you're only told the next layer and the next insight when you're ready. Especially when you come as a non-indigenous person, you won't be told the full story.
It's like in life, right? You're always just supposed to kind of uncover that next piece of puzzle of your journey. You're not supposed to know it all at once.
But quite often, from my experience, they do it very consciously on what gets shared and what not by certain people, and only certain people share certain stories. I spent a lot of time with different people, different indigenous people from different continents, and I would never ever say that I really know the details of their culture. What I I'm pretty sure I know, and several people have told me, indigenous people, I very much understand the principles that it's based on. And the principles are not that complicated on a theoretical level. However, to really feel them and know them and have experienced them, that requires a little bit of time and effort.
So what are some of those principles that you can share with us that we can, I guess, keep in the back of our mind, when we are going through the world, maybe thinking a bit more about that as well?
Yeah, so one of the principles is definitely everything is connected, the connectedness. That always supports respect, and it can come up in day-to-day life, even for us. How do you respect food? So, for example, food in the way is a seed, water, soil, sunshine, all of that. It's needed for growth. So in an indigenous way, because everything is connected, and they would respect something that you're having there in a very different way. So respect is another thing. And then in the community, following certain rules, for example, reciprocity, where it's like this give and take principle. And the underlying principle of that is like there has to be some balance. The balance doesn't mean everything is all the time equal. It's more, you come back to a certain set point, and give and take is nothing different. So community is more like the we is more important than the me. So the community is more important than the individual. Definitely a big one. You have the connection to everything. You see everything very systemic. You have the respect. There are more, but these are some of the principles that pop up again and again.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think they're all principles that we can take into our everyday life, right? You can take that into work, you can take that into your family life, you can take that into your friendships. Like it's something that you can really try and implement and have in the back of your mind when you're doing things,
One of the differences is also how you become a leader. An elder is in a way growing into this eldership. A leader in business is given the role. An elder is not given the role. An elder is sort of selected by the community because they have done things in a certain way over a period of time, and then they are, maybe not the right word, but deemed to be the right person to carry the wisdom for the next generation and share it and do the teaching and all of that. And they respect you because of you and everything you have done. In indigenous communities, traditionally, elders were really respected.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think it really shows us how we can learn from the indigenous cultures as well, to try and implement some of that really ancient wisdom in our modern society, and how that can actually support everything.
And sometimes when you think about it, what we call ancient wisdom or indigenous wisdom, when you go then back to the philosopher or the Romans and the Greek philosophers or Taoism or Buddhism, they're all little wisdom snippets in there that are very useful for today. And when you think about them for a while, the common element is quite often it's very basic, back to the roots, human nature, what we as humans actually need. So in a way, over the time, we have overcomplicated some of the things and moved away from what's really good for us, what keeps us well. Up to the point when we said, where we started with self-care and self-awareness, if you're not taking care of your body with sleep, food, movement, breathing fresh air and all of that, then your body will not serve you to deliver on all these other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you have done the most beautiful job in your book, really summarizing all that knowledge and all that wisdom that you have pretty much soaked up over the years into a very comprehensive very easily to understand, very practical book as well, you know. It leaves the reader, with practical tips and to-dos of how they can really make changes in their own life, in certain areas in their life where it's needed. And I think that's why you've just done such a beautiful job there.
Thank you. That's very kind.
Well, so where to from here, Ingrid? You've written this beautiful book. Why do you do all that amazing work that you're doing? And why do you think this work is so incredibly important in this day and age and, you know, moving forward as well?
So I'm really concerned about what's happening in the environment, and I'm concerned about what's happening with humanity. And I see that there are already a lot of people doing a lot of things. And I also have the belief we have all the solutions that we need. What we are missing is good and effective leadership. So obviously there are good leaders out there, however, maybe not enough, and maybe not everything that's judged as good leadership is really good leadership. So my aim is to work with people who want to do something good for people of our planet and may help them to become more effective and have less stress. So in a way, when they can achieve more positive impact and less struggle, their well-being is better. Then I, in a way, have achieved my purpose of giving something that helps planet and people to become better. So that's my motivation. And what I'm doing at the moment with it is going out and having conversations with leaders in this space and see what's troubling them, or where do they feel they could need support to make it in a more effective way. And then help them with coaching and workshops and mentoring and whatever way suits them. And if only in one area of their life it becomes easier or they feel better, that's my purpose.
Nice. And I think it's really nice as well how you said you're helping those leaders to be a better version of themselves, you know, and as we have talked about before, it's like at the end of the day, we're all part of one energy as well. And if those leaders are a better version of themselves, they can be a better version to their colleagues, to their employees, to their families, and it will change, you know, it will have that ripple effect. With your work, you're changing not just that person, you know, you're changing a whole community as well.
Yes. It's all connected.
Which is beautiful. So Ingrid, I'm trying to give my listeners the 3 main pieces of wisdom that have come out of our conversation. The 3 things that stood out the most was, the first thing is that time is such a big factor in our lives and that we need to slow down to notice what really matters, and that a lot of the time things are moving very fast. We're all very busy and we really need to take the time to slow down to make sure we're noticing the important things that are happening. The second one is around self-awareness, and starting to look at your self-awareness. It takes you out of autopilot. And the more we notice what's happening around us, the more that we can also control our life, you know, and it's all starting with noticing what's happening inside of me first, understanding myself first, and then also understanding others and then the wider systems around that. And the third thing was a thing around relationships, where you said, relationship building is more important than the task that's actually going to be worked on. So it's really people before tasks. If you want to be really successful and not just transactional, you have to put your people first. And we've talked about how, especially in indigenous cultures as well, that's kind of the go-to, right? That's where we are asking people, who are you? How are you? And it's a very personal approach to getting to know someone. So those 3 have kind of been my main 3 pieces of wisdom that have stood out for me.
Yeah, that was a rich conversation.
It's a great conversation. Ingrid, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today. It's been an absolute pleasure to dive deep into some really interesting topics today that will hopefully help people to, you know, look at themselves and see how they show up in the world, in the working world, but not just in the working world, also like in a personal world, you know. So thank you so much for making time and talking to me today.
Yeah, thank you for listening and creating the space for all of us. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure. I love the work that you're doing, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what's next for you and where the journey leads you.
Yeah, I will let you know.
Definitely, I will be following it. So we have mentioned a few resources today while we've been talking, including obviously Ingrid's beautiful book, Naturally Successful. I will put those in the podcast notes, and I'll also add the links to Ingrid's website so people know where they find you. They can also purchase the book via your website and on Amazon. So yeah, all of that information I will put together for you so you can find Ingrid really easily. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I really hope you got something out of this episode today. I think in a day and age where we're all so busy and have so many things on our to-do list, it's really important to just stop and listen to yourself and notice if what you're doing is actually what you want to do, and how are you looking after yourself, how aware are you of what's going on around you within yourself, but also within your family, within your friends and your social networks. So I really hope that the information and that the knowledge that Ingrid has shared with you today is going to be of benefit to you, and you can take something out of that and apply it in your own life and see, how it can support you. Please do share the podcast with your family, with your friends, with anyone that you think might be interested in this topic and benefit from the information. I hope this episode brought some sunshine to your soul. I'm sending love and light your way, and until next time.